If you would like to hear Night Dreams Talk Radio on your local radio station, let them know. Tell them to check out www.nightdreamstalkradio.com. And thank you.
You're listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio After Dark with our host, Gary Anderson.
And I am back. Boy, it's snowing down here at the compound, down at the harbor, and it's chilly in the studio. I tell you what, I sent my family members out to go get some Presto logs so we can stay nice and toasty tonight. Well, Jean, we are back.
Gary, we are indeed. And I hope I wasn't going on too long, but I'm so excited about this article I ran into, 2007, published in the Classical Journal by this cat, Richard Stothers, who had some affiliation with NASA. This was a NASA document, and had surveyed antique literature, the literature of antiquity, and discounted solar and lunar eclipses and comets, new stars, aurorae, and there were even reports of the sun dimming for a few years and turning red after large volcanic eruptions, because we know Vesuvius was active in the Italian zone, and there were volcanic incidences that were recorded, obviously. But some of these are wild and crazy, high strangeness, and it turns out that this author had met and was familiar with the work of Dr. J. Allen Hynek of Project Blue Book, and I'm sure you've heard of him.
Oh, yes. Actually, I had somebody on that actually knew him before he passed on, and actually his mother actually worked for him. So it was rather interesting to show on that.
Indeed. So Hynek is credited with defining close encounters of the first, second, and third kinds, and these escalate based on the distance between the observer and the craft, any material remains, physical evidence, yes or no, and the presence, yes or no, of occupants. Those would be aliens. So we have an example of a close encounter of the first kind in 74 before Christ, 74 BC. A Roman army under a commander named Lucullus was about to engage the forces of King Mithridates the Sixth of Pontus. I have no idea where these places are, but they're in the old Roman Empire. And the historian Plutarch preserved what thousands of witnesses, including himself and the king, saw, quote, "But presently, with no apparent change of weather, but all of a sudden, the sky burst asunder, and a huge flame-like body was seen to fall between the two armies. In shape, it was most like a wine jar, and in color, like molten silver. Both sides were astonished at the sight and separated. This marvel, as they say, occurred in Phrygia at a place called Otrae, or something along that line. So whatever fell out of the sky, shaped like a wine jug, I'm sure these were mass-produced, so a very familiar shape to people of that time. And I've seen amphora. They are elongated vessels that have a bulge in the middle and then taper to a neck. They often have handles on the sides. I don't know what these exactly look like. But they're seeing these silvery objects, like molten silver, this one thing, falling down between two armies, and they flee, basically. I'm sure they dropped weapons and just flee. It says they separated. They stopped fighting.
Well, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Are you familiar with Major Ed Dames?
Oh, yes.
So this ties into me with this the Final Extinction Prophecy kill shot event, right? And the last thing the remote viewers see, according to them and Major Ed Dames, who was teaching remote viewing under a DARPA program, according to him, the last thing they can see is armies on a battlefield looking up in the sky, pointing, then throwing down their weapons and retreating in orderly files back to their home countries.
Interesting. But I have to say this. Major Dames has not been very accurate on all his, a friend of mine who's no longer with us, a friend of mine, Art Bell, we would talk numerous times a month for years.
Yes.
And in fact, I talked to him a few days before he passed on. I tell you, it was a joke between us about Major Dames because he would make all these, claims and none of them would ever come true, or very few of them actually happened. What he would say, the kill shot should have happened 15 years ago. It hasn't happened yet. People panicked that believed him, sold their property, moved out of country, moved to Australia and some other places, to Ukraine even, to be safe. I don't know.
Hey, man, we bought big bags of rice and beans just in case.
Well, you know what? Before it goes bad, you can eat a lot of rice and beans.
I write survival articles, and we talk about SHTF events. What hits the fan. SHTF events. Sooner or later, something's going to happen. The power will go out, or a meteorite will fall in your yard. I mean, it's just a matter of time, right? So might as well stock up on some rice and beans. It's just common sense. Some MREs, meals ready to eat.
A lot of cellophane to wrap your house in case this virus goes out of control.
Get a household generator with a Faraday cage in case of the EMP. I'm telling you what, for any scenario, there's somebody who has a countermeasure. And yet, I'm a fatalist. I truly believe when it's my time, it's my time. And that makes life so much easier. Not to say I don't protect myself or take reasonable precautions, but come on now. Do you agree that one can take this a little bit far and go overboard?
I know people that have. Peter Davenport has been on my show a lot of times. He has a underground old Nike, base where, he owns. But, the thing is, people do take it out of context. I remember an old Twilight Zone series.
I love that show.
Okay, do you remember the one with the guy who liked reading? He worked for a bank.
Oh, yeah.
And he would read books and books and books. And while he was in the safe, a nuclear war exchanged. Mm-hmm. And he walks out of the safe because that's all there was left. And it was nothing much but debris. But he walks a little ways and he sees what's left of a library. He's now ecstatic because he sees all these books, great books of art. And he's stacking them up. And he's all alone. Yeah.
There's nobody there to compete.
But then he breaks his glasses. And he can't see without them.
That twist ending. I love the twist ending. When I write, I love to employ it, and I learned it from Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock, who did anthologies where he promoted other writers who also specialized in the twist ending. And, of course, Edgar Allan Poe, master of the twist. Loved Poe. All these dark writers influenced all of my thoughts. And, my dad, as your dad, worked, he was also in electronics, and he was tasked for a year as a contractor, right fresh out of college in the early 1950s, to wire up electronic towers, to wire up observation towers with electronics to record the radiation effects, all sorts of radiation effects from nuclear devices being tested in the American Southwest, where they'd build this little test town of 10 by 10 plywood houses. And then they'd actually put furniture inside them, all the same, because it's a control experiment.
And
so every house
has
rooms and beds and mannequins. And then they detonate a device and they see what happens. And my dad was in charge of the technical team that wired up towers for observations and described being handed out the earphones to protect from the sound and polarized lenses and hunkering down under dirt bunkers. I'm not kidding. They had no idea what they were doing, literally, the forces that they were dealing with. And this was after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, by the way, for people who aren't that familiar with the timeline. So we knew, he showed me books from that the U.S. government compiled after those Japanese events, showing the anomalous behavior of radiation burning and radiation effects, where the radiation is so intense it reflects off of light surfaces but penetrates dark surfaces. So victims in Japan who were wearing print clothing had the pattern of the print burned into their bodies through any dark colors, and the light color reflected it. It was creepy looking.
Oh, yeah, and steps and stuff. There actually was like photographs of the person sitting on, the steps. From it. It's scary, but here's what I always get a kick. I know we're off of the UFO subject a little bit.
Oh, I know, but it's all related because the UFOs started showing up when we started mucking about with nukes.
Oh, yeah. It started up actually in my state of Washington, about Mount Rainier. But going to this, about this testing, all these servicemen, not just Army personnel like in Nevada when they were detonating these nuclear bombs, because they didn't realize what this radiation would do to all these people with their little glasses on, right? And going into a fetal position when they detonated the bomb. How about the Navy when they went out in the Pacific and took old ships and detonated them, with a nuclear bomb over them? And then the poor sailors had to be, on deck with their little goggles, going into fetal position to see what type of effects it would have on, military personnel. And then we were so naive, we boarded these ships, too, after they were, irradiated like what. Crazy.
Crazy stuff. My dad was on a covert project called Ivy, and its purpose was to develop the first 10 megaton hydrogen bomb. And it was successful. And the night before the first test of this massive explosive device, the general in charge of the project called up my dad and asked him, how confident are you in the math you did to figure out a safe distance for the observation airplane which we're going to fly up there at the time of the detonation to get visual and do sensor readings in the air as well, right? Because that's what they do. That's what the military does. And my dad said, "I'm highly confident, sir, in my calculations." And the guy said, "I hope you are, Teddy, because you're going up with us tomorrow." And my mom said years later, remembering this, that my dad stayed up all night triple checking his math. And in those days, they had slide rules.
Oh, yeah.
He was involved in the very early computers, but none of that was used for any of this kind of work at the time.
Yeah, I remember my dad was a slide ruler. Yeah. Now, I question.
And they went up, and when they were up, they were apparently a safe enough distance, but one of these cowboy pilots, is the only way I can describe him, took it upon himself to volunteer to fly through the mushroom cloud. I kid you not. He flew through this cloud. The plane came out the other side. He was dead, of course, and the plane crashed. Well, by that time, the military began to get hip to the idea that exploding these things above ground, maybe it's not the greatest idea in the world. No. And then the UFO started showing up at Malmstrom. That's one of the chapters in my book. Malmstrom sightings, lots of sightings that most people never heard of because they were classified. And it's only due to very brave government insiders, military insiders, coming forth and doing disclosure, what the government calls whistleblowing, blowing the whistle on these stories. We wouldn't know otherwise.
Well, you know what? They did really crazy things. They were dropping radiation over cities at one point to see what illness it would cause with the civilians. They did that.
Where was that? In the United States?
In the United States, certainly. And that has been declassified. They, at one point, were giving kids free toothpaste when you're in grade school. Now, this would have been in the late 50s, that the toothpaste was kind of irradiated. They wanted to see what would happen with kids brushing their teeth with this toothpaste. And they would monitor